The time was exactly 6:42 a.m. I know this because the atomic clock on my kitchen wall is synchronized with the Naval Observatory, and its crisp, liquid crystal display is the first thing I look at when I pour my coffee. It was a Tuesday in early October. A thin, silver mist was clinging to the low spots in the pasture, and the air held that clean, earthy scent of damp soil and approaching autumn. From my kitchen window, I have a perfect sweeping view of the eastern fence line, the one that separates my 300 acres of rolling ranch land from the manicured quarter-acre lots of the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. It was at that fence line, a good 400 yards from my house, that I saw her. Brenda Albright. She was wearing a ludicrously oversized sun hat, a pink tracksuit, and gardening gloves. And in her hands, she held a pair of bolt cutters. I didn't move. I simply stood there, the ceramic warmth of the coffee mug seeping into my palms. And I watched as she positioned the jaws of the cutters around a strand of high tensile wire, the same wire I had personally strung and tensioned, not 6 months prior. I watched her arms strain, her body rocking with the effort. There was a faint, metallic snap that the morning quiet carried all the way to my window. One strand parted. She moved to the next one, and then the next. She was methodical in her own brutish way. After severing the 5 strands of wire, she pushed the 2 sections apart, creating a gap perhaps 10 feet wide. Then, with a flourish of self-satisfaction, she began to pull up the metal T-posts, wrestling them from the ground and tossing them aside with theatrical disgust. She was clearing a path, an illegal one, on my land. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was black, no sugar, just the way my late wife Helen used to like it. I thought about Helen, about the peace we'd sought when we bought this land 20 years ago, the peace I had tried so hard to maintain. In the 5 years since she'd been gone, I set the mug down on the granite countertop, the click of ceramic on stone the only sound in the house. I picked up my phone from its charging cradle, opened the camera application, and zoomed in as far as the digital sensor would allow. The image was grainy, pixelated by the distance, but it was clear enough. It showed a woman in a pink tracksuit, on my property, actively destroying my fence. I pressed the red record button. I filmed for 2 solid minutes as she finished her work, finally stepping back to admire the gaping hole she'd created. She had no idea she was being recorded. She had no idea about so many things. I walked out my back door, not bothering to change out of my slippers. The dew was cold on the grass. I didn't hurry. I ambled towards the fence line at a steady, unbothered pace. My prize-winning herd of Black Angus cattle, about 50 head in that particular pasture, had already noticed the breach. A few of the younger, more curious heifers were tentatively approaching the gap, their dark eyes wide. Brenda was now waving her arms at them, shooing them, trying to encourage them to cross the property line into the manicured common area of Crestwood Estates. She saw me when I was about 30 yards away. A triumphant, smug smile spread across her face. This was what she wanted. A confrontation. A performance. "Well, good morning, Arthur," she called out, her voice sharp and carrying an unearned authority. "Finally decided to join the land of the living? I'm just fixing a little problem we've been having." I stopped about 10 feet from her, on my side of the now non-existent fence. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, then at the coiled wire and discarded posts lying in the wet grass. I looked at my curious cattle. "This fence," she said, gesturing with the bolt cutters as if they were a royal scepter, "is an illegal structure. It has been blocking the community's historic access path to the creek for years. We've been very patient, but our patience has run out. The HOA board held a vote, and we have decided to remove the obstruction. You can send us the bill for the disposal of your materials." I remained silent. I let her words hang in the damp air. Historic access path, illegal structure, board vote. These were all carefully chosen phrases, designed to create a fiction of legitimacy. They were utterly, demonstrably false. On paper they were lies. My silence seemed to unnerve her. Her smile tightened. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? The police have been notified that we would be performing this necessary maintenance. If you try to stop us, or if you attempt to rebuild this illegal fence, you will be fined, and we will have you charged with trespassing on HOA common property. I raised my phone, which was still recording, and made sure the lens was pointed directly at her. I said my first and only words of the encounter. My voice was low, calm, and perfectly steady. Brenda Albright, you are on my property. You have destroyed my fence. You are attempting to lure my livestock off my land. I am asking you to leave immediately. Her face, which had been a mask of smug certainty, flickered with rage. This is not your property. This is a community right-of-way. We have documents. We have bylaws. She took a step towards me, brandishing the cutters. You can't intimidate me, you old hermit. I am the president of the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. I didn't flinch. I just held the phone steady. The first of my heifers, a bold one I called Daisy, stepped gingerly through the gap, her hooves sinking into the soft, over-fertilized turf of the HOA common area. Another followed her. Brenda glanced back at them, a look of triumph returning to her face. This was her goal, to prove her point by having my cattle graze on the pristine lawn surrounding the community gazebo. I stopped recording and put the phone back in my pocket. I turned my back on her, on my fence, on my wandering cattle, and I started walking back to my house. Her angry, sputtering voice followed me, but I tuned it out. It was just noise. The real work was about to begin. She thought she had won. She thought she was exercising power. She had no idea who I was. She had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea that she had just, with her own two hands, signed a check for $300,000 and that the sheriff's department would one day come to collect it. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. You see, I am not just some old rancher. I'm not just a quiet widower who keeps to himself. For 45 years, my name was Arthur Pendleton, PLS, PE. The letters stand for Professional Licensed Surveyor and Professional Engineer. For the better part of 5 decades, I was a partner at one of the largest and most respected civil engineering and land use consulting firms in the state. My entire life, my entire career, was built on a foundation of paper. Deeds, plats, surveys, easements, covenants, restrictions, and the complex, beautiful, and unyielding logic of property law. I've testified as an expert witness in over 200 court cases. I've stared down teams of high-priced corporate lawyers who tried to argue that a boundary line was a suggestion. I've found forgotten survey monuments from the 1890s buried under 3 feet of asphalt in the middle of a city street. I don't deal in opinions or feelings or historic use. I deal in chains and links, in metes and bounds, in degrees, minutes, and seconds. I deal in documented, recorded, legally binding fact. And I kept the receipts. Always. When Helen and I bought this ranch, it was because we were tired of the city. We wanted quiet. We wanted a place where the only rules were the laws of nature and the laws of the state of Texas. Crestwood Estates didn't exist then. It was just an adjacent parcel of undeveloped land owned by a timber company. The developer who bought it 10 years later was a slick operator from California. He built 300 homes, slapped on a gaudy entrance with a crumbling stucco fountain, and established the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association. The first few years were fine. The HOA was a sleepy, informal thing, mostly concerned with reminding people to mow their lawns and not to leave their trash cans out. Then, about 8 years ago, Brenda Albright and her husband moved in. She was a woman who radiated a desperate need for importance. She saw the HOA not as a tool for maintaining property values, but as a fiefdom. She ran for the board, then for president, with a campaign of fear and whispers. She spoke of declining standards, of threats to their exclusive lifestyle. She won, and almost immediately, the letters and the fines began. Mr. Henderson in Lot 42 was fined $200 because his garden gnome was, according to Brenda, an unapproved lawn fixture of a whimsical nature. The Chens in Lot 117 were were fined $500 because their son's basketball hoop was left out overnight. A violation of a rule Brenda herself had invented and pushed through the board a week earlier. She had a network of sycophants, a compliance committee, who would patrol the neighborhood with clipboards and cameras, documenting every minor infraction. People were afraid of her. Most of them were working families, too busy or too intimidated to fight a $50 fine for having the wrong shade of beige on their window trim. They would just pay it to make her go away. It was easier. I watched all of this from a distance. I was not a member of the HOA. My property was explicitly and thankfully excluded from its covenants. But I was a neighbor. I heard the stories when I ran into people at the local feed store. I saw the simmering resentment. And I started a file. It began as a simple manila folder. On the tab, I wrote Crestwood HOA B Albright. The first thing I put in it was a copy of my own deed, along with the full title search I'd conducted before purchase. The second was the original survey plat of my property, a beautiful, hand-drafted document from 1958, cross-referenced with my own GPS-verified survey from 2003. These documents established, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that my property line was absolute and unencumbered by any easements or rights of way, save for a single utility easement on the far western edge, a full half-mile from Brenda's kingdom. Over the years, the folder grew. Whenever Brenda sent a blustering, accusatory letter, and she sent several, I would add it to the file. There was the time she claimed my cattle were a noxious odor nuisance and demanded I move them to the other side of my property. I responded with a polite, registered letter containing windrose data from the local airport and a copy of the state's Right to Farm Act. She never replied, but I kept copies of the letter, the delivery confirmation, and the certified mail receipt. That went in the folder. There was the time she insisted the 100-year-old oak tree near the fence line was on HOA property, and that she intended to have it cut down because its leaves were falling on their precious common area. I went to the county records office, pulled the original 1888 patent survey for my parcel, and found the surveyor's notes describing a prominent lone oak as a witness tree for the section corner. I then did my own survey, found the buried iron rod marking that corner, and proved the tree was a full 15 feet inside my property line. I sent her a letter with copies of the historic survey, my new survey plat stamped with my professional seal, and a gentle reminder of the treble damages provided by state law for the illegal removal of timber, especially a designated historic tree. The tree was never touched. The entire correspondence, including a photograph of the survey monument, went into the folder. So when she spoke of a historic access path, I knew exactly what she was talking about. Years ago, before the subdivision existed, local kids would sometimes cut across the corner of the property to get to the creek to fish. It was informal, unenforced trespassing. The previous owner, an old-timer named Carl, didn't mind. When I bought the place, I didn't mind either, for a while. But then the new houses came, and it wasn't just a few kids. It was adults with ATVs, people dumping trash, leaving beer cans. When Helen got sick, the last thing she needed was the noise and the disruption. So I put up the fence. It was a gesture of privacy, of peace. It was my right. Brenda had twisted this informal, historic trespassing into a legal right. In her mind, because something had happened, it was entitled to happen forever. This is a common and profoundly flawed understanding of the law. A claim for a prescriptive easement, which is what she was implicitly asserting, requires use that is, among other things, adverse and hostile to the landowner's interests for a continuous period of 10 years. My permissive tolerance of a few kids crossing my land negated that. Furthermore, the construction of the fence and the cessation of that use, years before the statutory period could ever be met, extinguished any potential claim. On paper, her argument was a ghost. She had no idea, but she believed it, and she made others believe it. Back in my kitchen, I poured myself a second cup of coffee. The adrenaline I hadn't realized was there began to fade, replaced by a familiar, cold clarity. The feeling I used to get at the start of a complex boundary dispute case. It was time to get to work. I took the manila folder, now expanded into a thick, 3-ring binder with neatly organized tabs, and set it on my dining room table. The table was a massive slab of polished oak Helen had loved, and it had been our family's center for decades. Now, it was my war room. First, I downloaded the video from my phone to my secure server and made 2 backup copies on physical drives. I labeled one Exhibit A, Fence Destruction, and placed it in a fireproof safe. I then called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named David Chen. He was the son of the family Brenda had fined for the basketball hoop. He had a personal interest in this. "David," I said, "it's Arthur Pendleton. I have a situation here. It appears the Crestwood HOA has finally escalated from frivolous letters to felony property destruction." I explained what had happened, my voice flat and procedural. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Arthur, tell me you got it on video." Of course I did, David, and she was kind enough to identify herself and her official capacity on the recording. I could almost hear him smile through the phone. "Excellent. What are the damages?" "That's the next step," I told him. "I have 50 head of registered Black Angus in that pasture. They are now mingling on HOA common property. The potential for liability here is enormous. If one of them gets spooked, wanders onto the road and causes an accident, well, Brenda has opened a Pandora's box of liability for her association. And for herself, personally," David added. "The corporate veil of an HOA is thin when it comes to intentional torts committed by its officers." "What do you want to do?" "I want to be methodical," I said. "I'm going to handle the immediate problem of the cattle first. Then, I'm going to calculate the damages down to the penny. I'll send you a full package by the end of the day. For now, I just wanted you to be aware. I anticipate a visit from law enforcement, instigated by her, and I want to be prepared." "Understood," he said. "Call me the second they arrive. And Arthur, don't talk to them without me on the phone." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said, and hung up. The next call was to my ranch foreman, a stoic man named Miguel. He'd worked for me for 15 years. "Miguel," I said, "we have a breach in the East Pasture, Section 4. Mrs. Albright from the subdivision decided to do some unauthorized modifications." "With bolt cutters again?" he asked, his voice weary. He'd seen this coming. "With bolt cutters," I confirmed. "The herd is loose on the common area. I need you and the boys to bring the stock trailer and some portable panels. We're going to have to round them up, but I want to do this carefully. I want to document everything." "On my way," he said. While I waited, I began the formal process. I sat down at my desk and drafted a certified letter. This was not a friendly warning. This was a formal notice of liability. It was addressed to Brenda Albright in her official capacity as president, and to the Crestwood Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors. The letter was precise. It stated the date and time of the incident. It described the actions taken by Mrs. Albright. It cited the specific state statutes for criminal mischief and destruction of property. It stated that by willfully destroying my fence and luring my livestock onto their property, the HOA had assumed full and immediate liability for the care, control, and well-being of 50 head of registered Black Angus cattle, valued at approximately $6,000 per head. I informed them that they were now responsible for any and all damages the cattle might cause, and for any injury or loss of the cattle themselves. I included a fee schedule. The cost for emergency livestock relocation services, provided by my own ranch hands, would be billed at $200 per man-hour, with a 4-hour minimum per man. The cost for renting the stock trailer and portable corrals was listed at $500 per day. There would be a veterinary inspection fee for each animal to ensure they hadn't ingested any pesticide-treated grass or poisonous ornamental plants from their manicured gardens. That would be another $5,000. The cost to repair the fence was itemized: new T-posts, new high-tensile wire, clips, tensioners, and 8 hours of labor, totaling $2,500. Then came the masterstroke. I pulled out the thick binder containing the Crestwood Estate's governing documents, which I had obtained from the county records office years ago. I flipped to the master deed and declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the original document filed by the developer in 1982. Brenda and her board only ever seemed to read the much thinner book of bylaws, the day-to-day rules about lawn gnomes and basketball hoops. They had clearly never read the foundational document that gave their HOA its very existence. I had, many times, and I knew what was in Section 14.7, subsection B. It was a clause the developer's lawyers had put in to protect him from lawsuits from the original owner of my property, Carl. It was titled Indemnification Regarding Adjacent Agricultural Operations. The clause was beautifully written, a piece of art in legalese. It stated that the HOA acknowledged the existence of the adjacent agricultural property and that the HOA, on behalf of itself and all its members, agrees to hold harmless and to fully and completely indemnify the owner of said adjacent agricultural property from any and all claims, damages, liabilities, costs, or expenses, including reasonable attorney's fees, arising from or related to any act of trespass, nuisance, or interference by the association or its members, agents, or officers upon said agricultural property. It was a ticking time bomb written into the very DNA of their community. Brenda's act of cutting the fence wasn't just trespassing, it was a textbook act of interference. The clause meant the HOA had contractually agreed, from the moment of its inception, to pay for every single penny of the damage she caused. Plus, my attorney's fees. She had no idea. I scanned this section and attached it as Exhibit A to my letter. I concluded the letter with a simple statement: a full and final invoice for all damages will be delivered to you upon the successful recovery and inspection of my livestock. Payment in full will be due within 30 days. Govern yourselves accordingly. I printed 3 copies, one for my files, one for David, and one to be sent via certified mail. Return receipt requested to the HOA's official address, which happened to be Brenda's house. I also decided to have a copy hand-delivered by a professional process server that afternoon. There would be no claiming she never got it. The paper trail had to be immaculate. By the time Miguel and his team arrived, I had my camera out again. I filmed them unloading the portable corral panels. I filmed my cattle grazing placidly around the ridiculous stucco gazebo. A few of the Crestwood residents had come out of their houses. They stood on their porches, whispering, some looking worried, others looking amused. Brenda was nowhere to be seen. She had likely retreated to her house to call the police and prepare her victimhood narrative. Miguel and his 2 sons, who were as skilled with livestock as anyone I'd ever seen, worked quietly and efficiently. They set up a temporary corral, then gently hazed the cattle towards it. It was a slow process. The animals were in an unfamiliar place and we didn't want to spook them. It took nearly 3 hours to safely contain all 50 of them. During that time, 2 things of note happened. First, a man I recognized as Mr. Henderson, the victim of the garden gnome incident, walked tentatively over to me. He was a retired accountant, a small, neat man who always seemed to be shrinking away from the world. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I saw what she did this morning from my window." "I appreciate that, Mr. Henderson," I said. "I saw it too." He wrung his hands. "She's a tyrant, a bully. She's been telling everyone for weeks that she was going to do this. She said at the last board meeting that you were an arrogant old man who thought the law didn't apply to you." He looked horrified at his own words. I'm sorry. I shouldn't. It's quite all right, I said calmly. Did she say this during the official, recorded part of the board meeting? He shook his head. No, she always has them turn off the recorder when she wants to editorialize. But he hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I've been making my own recordings, on my phone, ever since she fined my wife over the color of her petunias. I looked at Mr. Henderson. The fearful, timid man was holding out a treasure, a record of her malice, of her intent. Mr. Henderson, I said slowly, that evidence could be extremely valuable. It could help ensure that she is held accountable, not just to me, but to this entire community. He nodded, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. I'll email you the files, he said, and scurried back to his house. Another piece of paper, or in this case, a digital file, for my collection. The second event was the predictable arrival of the sheriff's department. 2 deputies, one older and weathered, the other young and sharp, pulled up in their patrol car. They didn't use their lights or siren. They parked, got out, and were immediately intercepted by Brenda Albright, who must have been watching from her window. She burst out of her front door and began a masterful performance. Her voice was high and strained with panic. "Oh, thank God you're here, officers," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That man, his beasts are everywhere. They're going to destroy everything. He's let them loose to intimidate me. He's threatening me." I watched as the deputies listened, their faces impassive. The older one, whose name tag read Sandoval, had the patient, seen it all before, expression of a man who had dealt with 1,000 neighborhood disputes. The younger one, Miller, was watching me, his eyes taking in my calm demeanor, my work clothes, my crew of professionals carefully managing the livestock. Brenda was still talking, a torrent of accusations. Illegal fence, historic community path. He threatened me. I was in fear for my life. His cows are dangerous. Finally, Sergeant Sandoval held up a hand. "Ma'am, please, let me get this straight. You're saying his cattle are on your property?" "Yes, on HOA common property. He's deliberately—" "And how did they get there?" Sandoval asked, his eyes flicking over to the very obvious, freshly cut gap in my fence. Brenda's narrative faltered for a microsecond. The fence had a failure. It was a derelict, unsafe fence. I was merely removing the hazard when they escaped. It was a clumsy, transparent lie. The clean cuts on the wire and the neatly piled posts told a different story. Sandoval sighed, a barely audible puff of air, and walked over to me. Miller followed, keeping a respectful distance. "Sir," Sandoval said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Sergeant Sandoval. This is Deputy Miller. Can you tell me your name and what's going on here?" "Good morning, Sergeant," I said, offering my hand. He shook it. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. This is my property, and this is my livestock. This morning at approximately 6:42 a.m., that woman," I nodded towards Brenda, "used bolt cutters to destroy a section of my fence and intentionally allowed my cattle to wander onto the land she controls." Sandoval's eyes didn't change, but I saw a flicker of understanding in Miller's. Brenda shrieked from 30 feet away. "That's a lie. He's a liar. I have a right. The HOA has a right." "Sir, do you have any proof of this allegation?" Sandoval asked me. Before I could answer, I saw David Chen's car pull up. He had decided not to wait. He got out, wearing a crisp suit that looked out of place next to the cow pies, and walked over. "Good morning, Sergeant," he said, handing him a business card. "I'm David Chen, Mr. Pendleton's counsel. My client has video evidence of the entire event, which we will be happy to provide to the district attorney's office as part of our formal criminal complaint. For now, however, we are simply trying to mitigate the dangerous situation created by Mrs. Albright." Brenda's face went pale. The word video seemed to suck the air out of her lungs. "Furthermore," David continued, his voice as calm and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, "my client is the legal, deeded owner of this property. Here is a copy of his deed and the most recent survey plat, filed with the county." He produced a slim folder and handed it to Sandoval. The documents were my duplicates, always ready for such an occasion. Sandoval took the folder and looked through it. He was a country cop. He knew what a deed and a survey plat were. He looked at the clear, unambiguous lines, the surveyor's seal, the county clerk's stamp. He then looked over at Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier patience. "These documents seem to indicate that this fence is, in fact, on Mr. Pendleton's property. Do you have any registered deeds or easements that contradict this?" "We have bylaws," she insisted, her voice cracking. "We have historic use. Everyone knows that's our path. Ma'am, with all due respect, bylaws don't supersede a recorded deed," Sandoval said. He was trying to be gentle, to de-escalate, but the facts were overwhelming. He turned to me. "Mr. Pendleton, what is the estimated value of the damage to your fence?" "The materials and labor to repair it will be approximately $2,500, I stated. "Under state law, property damage over $1,500 is a state jail felony." I saw Deputy Miller's pen begin to move on his notepad. "This is a civil matter," Brenda suddenly yelled, parroting a phrase she'd probably heard on a TV show. "You can't do anything." "Ma'am, the destruction of property is not a civil matter," Sandoval said, his tone now cold. "But for now, our priority is public safety. Mr. Pendleton is taking reasonable steps to secure his animals. I would advise you to return to your home and let him do so. We will be filing a report." He handed the documents back to David. He and Miller then took detailed photographs of the cut fence, the discarded posts, and the cattle in the temporary corral. They took my statement. Then they took a long, rambling, and contradictory statement from Brenda. The entire encounter lasted about 45 minutes. When they left, Brenda shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred, then stormed back into her house. The performance was over. The consequences were just beginning. The rest of that day was spent on logistics. We got the cattle loaded and moved to a secure pasture on the other side of the ranch. The veterinarian came out and gave each one a clean bill of health. An expensive but necessary step to document that they were unharmed. I had the vet's bill emailed to me before he even left the property. It went into the folder. The process server delivered the notice of liability to a stunned-looking Mr. Albright, and his signed confirmation was scanned and added to the folder. David Chen formally filed the criminal complaint with the sheriff's office and the DA, attaching the video file. By 5 p.m., I was back at my dining room table. The binder was open. I had the invoices for the vet, for Miguel's crew, for the materials to repair the fence. I had the audio files from Mr. Henderson. I had a copy of the police report, which David had already obtained. It was a masterpiece of neutral language that nonetheless painted Brenda as an unhinged aggressor. But there was still a missing piece. The final, crushing weight of evidence that would transform this from a simple property dispute into a corporate execution. I needed to prove beyond any doubt that the HOA board was fully aware of Brenda's intentions and had, through either action or inaction, endorsed them. Mr. Henderson's audio was a good start, but it was off the record. Or, I needed something official. That's when Sarah called. Sarah was another member of the HOA board. She was a young lawyer, a new mother, and she had initially joined the board with good intentions. I knew from casual conversations that she had grown increasingly disillusioned with Brenda's dictatorial style. "Arthur, it's Sarah from the HOA board," she said, her voice low and nervous. I think I need to talk to you. I just got a frantic call from Brenda. She's trying to call an emergency meeting to have the HOA pay for her legal defense." "Is that so?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes. And she's lying to everyone. She's saying you destroyed your own fence to frame her. She's saying your cattle stampeded. It's insane." There was a pause. "Arthur, I was at the meeting where she announced she was going to do this. I voted against it. Me and one other person. But she pushed it through. She told us she had consulted an attorney and that we were on solid legal ground. She called it abating a nuisance." This was it. This was the key. Sarah, was this vote recorded in the official meeting minutes? Yes, she said. She phrased the motion vaguely, something like, motion to authorize the president to take all necessary actions to remove the illegal fence obstruction on the eastern common area, but we all knew what she meant. She held up a picture of the bolt cutters she had just bought. My mind was racing. The official minutes, showing a vote to authorize her actions, would irrevocably tie the entire HOA to her crime. They had voted to commit a felony. Sarah, I said, I know you're in a difficult position, but those minutes are a public record for any member of the HOA, and as a board member, you have a fiduciary duty to protect the association from liability. Brenda's actions have exposed the HOA to hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. Hiding that fact, or going along with her lies, could expose you to personal liability. I let that sink in. I wasn't threatening her, I was stating a fact. A fact that, as a lawyer, she would understand perfectly. She was quiet for a long time. "What do you need, Arthur?" she finally asked. "I need a copy of the minutes from that meeting," I said. "And I need a sworn affidavit from you, testifying to the fact that Brenda explicitly stated her intent to cut the fence and showed the board the tool she would use to do it." "They'll kick me off the board. She'll make my life a living hell," she whispered. "She is already doing that, isn't she?" I replied gently. "The question is whether you want to be a victim or whether you want to help fix the problem. I'm going to fix it, Sarah, with or without the minutes. But with them, I can ensure the cancer is cut out for good and that the HOA can be saved. Without them, the entire association might be bankrupted by this." Another long pause. "Okay," she said, her voice firming with resolve. "I'll do it. My husband is a notary. I'll have the affidavit and a copy of the minutes for your lawyer by morning." When I hung up the phone, I felt a wave of weariness wash over me. That this wasn't a game. It was a dirty, unpleasant business, but it was necessary. Order had to be restored. I closed the binder. All the pieces were in place. The paper trail was complete, a fortress of facts. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of legal activity. David Chen compiled everything into a single, devastating package. He filed a civil suit against Brenda Albright personally and against the Crestwood Estates, HOA. The suit alleged trespass, destruction of property, private nuisance, and a breach of their own covenants under the indemnification clause. The damages were itemized with excruciating detail. The cost of the fence repair, the cost of the livestock relocation, the vet bills, the cost of David's legal fees, which were already substantial, the cost for my own time, billed at my old expert witness rate of $500 an hour, for the 20 hours I had spent documenting, managing, and resolving the situation. And then there was the punitive damage claim. We argued that Brenda's actions were not merely negligent, but malicious and intentional, designed to harass and intimidate. For that, we asked for $200,000. The grand total came to $297,452.38. We rounded it up to a nice, clean $300,000 for settlement purposes. Brenda's response was predictable. The HOA's lawyer, a man who normally handled delinquent dues, sent back a blustering letter full of denials and counter-accusations. They claimed I was running a dangerous commercial operation, that my fence was an eyesore, and that they would be counter-suing me for the decrease in their property values. It was a work of pure fiction. Brenda, meanwhile, escalated her personal campaign. She filed for a temporary restraining order against me, claiming I was stalking her and that she was afraid of me. The hearing was in 3 days. This was her final, desperate move, an attempt to paint herself as the victim in a court of law before our civil suit could get underway. She had no idea she was walking straight into our trap. The courtroom for the restraining order hearing was small and smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Brenda was there with her husband and 2 of her board member cronies, all dressed in their Sunday best. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, She had her lawyer, a slick, overconfident man who looked like he was auditioning for a television show. I was there with David. I wore a simple tweed jacket. I had my binder with me. The judge was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, named Judge Hernandez. She had a reputation for not suffering fools. Brenda's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a poor, civic-minded woman who was being terrorized by her brutish, wealthy rancher neighbor. He spoke of her fear, of my threatening posture, of my unleashed beasts. Brenda even took the stand and gave a tearful, Oscar-worthy performance. She claimed she was just trying to beautify the community when I confronted her in a rage. When it was David's turn, he was brief. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to present 3 pieces of evidence in response to this baseless petition." He turned on the courtroom monitor. The first thing that appeared was the video from my phone. The entire courtroom watched in silence as Brenda Albright, in her pink tracksuit, systematically destroyed my fence. They heard her voice loud and clear, claiming authority she did not have. They heard my own voice, calm and quiet, asking her to leave my property. They saw her lunge towards me with the bolt cutters. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Brenda's face was ashen. Her lawyer was staring at his legal pad as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Second, Your Honor," David continued, "we'd like to present the official report from the Sheriff's Department regarding this incident, which I have marked as Exhibit B." He handed a copy to the judge and to Brenda's lawyer. Judge Hernandez read it quickly, her eyebrows rising slightly. "And finally, Your Honor," David said, his voice dropping for dramatic effect, "we'd like to present the official, signed minutes of the Crestwood Estates HOA board meeting from October 2nd. I have marked the relevant passage in which the board, at Mrs. Albright's direction, voted to authorize the removal of the fence." He handed over the minutes, along with Sarah's sworn affidavit. Judge Hernandez read the minutes. She read the affidavit. She looked up from the papers, over the top of her reading glasses, and stared directly at Brenda Albright. It was a look that could have curdled milk. "Mrs. Albright," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you come into my courtroom, under oath, and you tell me a story about being a victim. You claim you were in fear for your life. But this evidence tells a very different story. It tells a story of a woman who took the law into her own hands, destroyed her neighbor's property, and then lied about it to law enforcement and to this court. Is there anything you'd like to say?" Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. In that moment, she was no longer the powerful HOA president. She was just a petty, spiteful woman, exposed by the bright, unforgiving light of documented truth. Her lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we withdraw our petition for the restraining order." "You do more than that, Counselor," Judge Hernandez snapped. "You get your client out of my courtroom, and I would strongly advise her to prepare for the consequences of filing a perjurious police report and lying under oath. I will be referring this matter to the district attorney's office myself. We are done here." She banged the gavel, and it echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The collapse was total. The news of what happened in the courtroom spread through Crestwood Estates like wildfire. The HOA's lawyer called David the next day. The bluster was gone. He wanted to talk about a settlement. David was firm. "There is no negotiation," he told him. "The settlement amount is $300,000. Payment is due in full within 30 days. If it is not, we will proceed to trial, and we will add a claim for fraud and conspiracy, and we will be deposing every single board member who voted with Mrs. Albright. We will ask for a full audit of the HOA's finances. We will make this the most expensive fence in the history of Texas." The HOA's insurance carrier, upon reviewing our evidence package, immediately informed the board that they would not cover the damages. Their policy had an exclusion for intentional criminal acts committed by board members. The entire $300,000 would have to come from the HOA's own funds. An emergency meeting of the homeowners was called. It was held in the high school auditorium because the community clubhouse wasn't big enough to hold all the angry residents. I didn't go, but David did, along with Sarah and Mr. Henderson. David told me it was a spectacle. Brenda tried to give another one of her performances, but the residents shouted her down. Sarah took the podium and, with a clear, steady voice, explained exactly what Brenda had done, how she had lied to the board, and how her actions had exposed them all to this massive liability. Mr. Henderson played the audio from his phone over the auditorium's sound system, and everyone heard Brenda's vindictive, off-the-record rants. The vote was nearly unanimous. Brenda Albright was removed from the board by a special recall. The 2 board members who had supported her resigned on the spot. A motion was passed to pay the settlement to me immediately, via a special assessment. It would cost each of the 300 homeowners an extra $1,000. A check for $297,452.38 was cut from the HOA's reserve fund. But they didn't have the full amount. They were short by about $20,000. After a week of panicked silence from their end, David simply filed the necessary paperwork with the court. The settlement had been agreed upon. Their failure to pay was a breach. The court issued a writ of execution. That's how, one bright November morning, I found myself standing on my porch again, sipping my coffee and watching Sergeant Sandoval and Deputy Miller pull up to Brenda Albright's house. This time, however, they weren't there to take a report. They were there with a court order. They were there to collect. An officer of the court can, with a writ, seize assets to satisfy a judgment. They can take cars. They can take jewelry. They can empty bank accounts. I don't know the specifics of what happened inside her house, but after about 30 minutes, a tow truck arrived and hooked up a late-model Mercedes SUV. Then, another one came for her husband's ostentatious sports car. Apparently, the value of the 2 vehicles was enough to cover the remaining $20,000, plus the cost of the seizure. As the tow trucks pulled away, I saw Brenda standing in her doorway, her face a blank mask of disbelief. She had relied on performance and social pressure, and in the end, her performance had been met with the cold, unyielding machinery of the law. Her pressure had been met with the brute force of a tow hook on a steel chassis. The community began to heal. Sarah was elected the new HOA president. Her first act was to commission a full, independent audit of the HOA's finances under Brenda's leadership, which uncovered years of petty graft and mismanagement. The absurd rules about garden gnomes and petunia colors were rescinded. Mr. Henderson was appointed head of the new, and much more reasonable, Architectural Review Committee. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. People started talking to each other again. The fear was gone. I used the settlement money to do 3 things. First, I paid David's fees. Then, I set up a small scholarship fund at the local community college for students pursuing degrees in agriculture or land management. The rest, the bulk of it, I invested. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. It was about the fact that rules, real rules, matter. I repaired the fence myself. I used heavier gauge wire and set the T-posts in concrete. It's a good fence, strong, clear. It marks a line not of hostility but of respect. A line that says, this is mine and that is yours. Let us be good neighbors, each on our own side. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on my porch and look out over the land. I see the lights of Crestwood Estates twinkling in the distance. They seem warmer now, less intrusive. The peace that Helen and I came here to find, the peace that was so rudely disrupted, has returned. It's a deeper peace now, one that has been tested and affirmed. On my desk, inside my office, the binder still sits on the shelf. It's a tangible record of a battle fought not with anger, but with documentation. Not with shouting, but with diligence. It's a monument to the simple, powerful idea that truth, when properly recorded and preserved, is the strongest weapon there is. The folder is closed now. The account is settled. On paper, and in fact, the order is restored, and the ranch, my home, is quiet again.